Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Project Flux podcast. Today, we're joined by Pavan Birdi, Senior Associate at Pascal and Watson, with a rich background that includes stints at Foster's and Partners and Kengo Kuma and Associates in Tokyo. Pav brings a wealth of experience to architecture, and he's now the poster boy for AI and implementation at Pascal and Watson. Pav, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Honored to be here. It's
James, how are you?
Good, really good. And it's great to have Pavan on. I know we've been trying for quite some time to get you on the show. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Pavan. There's loads of great experience you're going to tell us about.
So we'll cover a lot of ground today. We'll touch into project management, design with AI as well, and we'll also look into some deeper concepts. So, Pav, there's so much going on in AI, and across the industry, people are facing loads of different challenges. And I know that you're facing different challenges yourself, as using AI, but also within Pascal's. So, what's been on your mind lately?
so I would say one of the biggest challenges we have is how we're integrating AI into our workflow. Unlike there's so many different types of businesses, different types of architecture firms that have a different attitude towards risk, for example, that's associated with AI. We do a lot of aviation projects. That's our main sector. We do defense. So our risk attitude is quite it's very low. We're very, very conscious about it. So we've been quite slow in our adoption because we've just been looking at the landscape. We've been just reviewing, what's worked, what hasn't worked. So I think there's that attitude towards risk, and then there's also the environmental factors that are associated with AI. We've worked really hard to become a net zero company. Carbon neutral. We've got a sustainability team that have done really well. But there's quite a lot of controversy behind the demand of using AI. The prompts. I think it's, Google, Meta. They've been literally, bulldozing their way into building massive data centers. Because they want to keep up with the demand and they really want to be prominent in this space. And I think to fulfill that demand and build these massive data centers, they're not the most sustainable projects that they're doing. So we need to be aware of what we're contributing when we're using AI. So that's why we need to be very strategic with its implementation. And then also cost. We haven't dived in straight away. We know that there's corporations who have spent a lot of money and invested building their own language models. When we had a look at that and we're looking at the costs associated to doing that, we felt it was too early and there may not be a benefit of doing that straight away. And then, for example, we discussed this previously is, when DeepSeek came out with their language model, NVIDIA's stock just plummeted, right? Because they realized, it's not just these massive organizations who are trying to monopolize this, that actually you can make a language model a lot cheaper. They did it for a fraction of the price. So, there was a cost saving there by not rushing into it as well.
Although I would say Nvidia's stock's back up, I think, to where it was.
Yeah,
so,
it would be. Yeah, because they're doing so many other amazing things.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, true. So I think, we've been a bit slow, but it's only because we've been reviewing the market. But then, so it's understanding how we're going to bring that into our workflow, our day to day, and how can we do that in an ethical way, transparent way. I think it's important, for architects and project managers to get involved in this to help define what AI is doing in practice before some generic platform comes about and starts defining that for us.
That's the worry, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's where I am with.
And that's quite
that
interesting
right
that you say that, because when ChatGPT came out and the few months after it or the year after it, when a lot of businesses were starting to adopt AI, initially at a superficial level, there was so much going on and everyone wanted to jump onto the bandwagon, right? You guys have taken a much more reserved, conservative approach. Now, had you started with AI back in 2023, do you think you would have done things differently having done it now? Because it was all ChatGPT back then. You wouldn't even have heard of DeepSeek until a year in or so.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think people were playing with it, and I don't think then people would say, "Oh, this is great. I can ask certain questions." People weren't aware of the risks associated. Well, I know I wasn't. I was still learning a lot then. And then we started noticing that people were using it like they'd use Google, right? And the risk back then with 2023 was, well, it wasn't that. No one was fact checking it then, were they? It wasn't. It wasn't something that you could really rely on in terms of the source of material. But yeah, we noticed people were using it. We never really thought of it as an integrated part of our workflow. People were more focused on generative AI of imagery. So we know the people we were focusing more on at that time were people who were playing with Midjourney and like, the diffusion models.
Well, that's interesting because you as an architect would have been looking at generative AI from a design standpoint, right? And I guess early concepts of design can kind of favor hallucinations because you can get things that are quite richer, less homogenous. Equally, you've now delved into project delivery. So the use cases that you have within Pascal's are both from a design perspective and a project perspective. Could you speak more into the differences into how you use AI within both of those?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So why there was there was a group of guys who were playing around with diffusion models and doing imagery and say, oh look, we were producing this. I started messing around with the language model, the Chat GPT, and I was doing fee proposals. I wasn't putting any client information in there or any information about their states or anything like that. But I was messing around and I was saying, oh, can I? How long will it take me to do a fee proposal? And so I was basically having conversation with it to say a fee proposal where I'm going back and forth with my director. I'm getting more information from the client, and it would take me maybe 3-4 days to do one that we were really happy with. I could do that in an afternoon. I realized that I could do that quite well. But that was only because I'm quite experienced in doing fee proposals, understanding a project program and saying that's realistic. There was a lot of going back and fine tuning it with ChatGPT and saying, yeah, that's unrealistic. You've put, 3 weeks for a concept stage for this size project. That's unrealistic. So it was a lot of back and forth. I enjoyed that kind of interaction with someone, almost like making someone else do it and telling them what to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I started fine tuning that specific channel on ChatGPT, and now I've got a pretty good one where I can go in there. I've primed it enough that I can pretty much set the briefs, the scope, and everything, and get a pretty decent, realistic program and a fee against that in terms of resource profile as well, and use that.
Pavan, has that had an impact, any measurable impact on the success of your bids? Are you able to measure that in it?
So while I was doing that on an individual level, I know it's been beneficial for me in terms of time. Now we're looking at how do we roll this out as part of our workflow, right? So we aren't using ChatGPT right now. We've reviewed a series of LLMs, and we've actually settled on one called Omnichat, which Yoshi, I mentioned to you before. It's like an expert multi-modeled platform, right? So it has access to Claude and to Gemini and to ChatGPT 4, I think. And it takes the kind of like the best of both, depending on what you're doing. So we've literally just launched this, and we're experimenting with it, and we've basically done it in a phased rollout. So
Is that to everyone in the company?
Not to everyone. No. We've ideally would get it to a point maybe in the next 6 months that we would roll it out to everyone. Though we also need to determine who would actually benefit from it, depending on what their role is, what their individual goals are. But we've been just launched Omnichat. And what we're starting to do now is we've selected 15 people who we know would probably benefit from it the most. And so over the next month or so, they'll be using it a lot in their workflows and basically give us feedback.
Just on that, Pav, how did you identify who those people are or were?
Oh, so that's a good question. So we selected basically a key individual in every department, firstly. So we may have a technical director, who's reviewing the Q&A, the quality, the construction quality in our drawings going out. A project director, we've got our design director who's got access to it. We've got some of our associates, and we've got some people who are purely design focused. How can a language model help them? While they have access to the diffusion model that we've implemented, can they optimize an LLM as well in that sense to help with design? So there's key individuals, and because we didn't want to restrict it and say, no, only you only you can use this, only you're going to benefit from it, because we don't know. So it's best to select key individuals. The bidding team, for example, we know the bidding team are going to massively benefit from this. So I think it really depends on who we as an organization wanted to give access to. And so what we said is everyone. But let's give it to every type of person. Sorry, let me make that clear. Every type of person, because they may see benefits in it that we never initially saw.
Yeah.
So
that's the best way. You get to experiment like that, and it's one thing I'm a big proponent of is experimenting, because you just, at the moment, you can't tell exactly what the benefits or the risks are going to be until you've had a go effectively.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like having champions, because they always say, snowball sampling is always a great way of spreading the message, right? You start with someone who's a champion in a certain department. They see the utility of it. They then spread it across the business. When it comes from those who are managing the AI, it's like, well, that's your job, right? You're trying to push AI to everyone. So that's an interesting point. When you use Omnichat, though, because it does plug into the different models, do you have a kind of a hypothesis as to which model you think would come out on top most of the time?
It's a good question. So when we had a look at it, there was a table where it basically showed the accuracy in terms of fact checking of the different models. And I think Gemini, or was it Claude? One of those two was seen as, in terms of the information it gives, was most accurate. Because that's the thing.
It's interesting you say that. There was an article that I just read, I think from the weekend, where a UK university actually had all the models take a test alongside a bunch of students, and ChatGPT failed and Claude failed, and the one that came the highest, although it didn't beat the best student, was Gemini.
Gemini.
So that backs that up.
They're doing really well. Gemini 2.5 Pros.
Yeah. It's scary how confidently wrong their responses are. Like if you put some stuff in ChatGPT, especially the unpaid one, it will make up facts and it will give you a history, but as to why it's correct.
Yeah.
So for those untrained or those who are just taking it at face value, it's quite dangerous. So I think that's one thing that you've got to be aware of when you're using this, is to constantly fact check, and that's the benefit of Omnichat as well. Is
It's a bit like
even
people,
that,
though, right? It's a bit like people, because people aren't always right, but the ones that are quite persuasive are the ones you tend to
and
believe.
the people with bias and experience, particularly,
Yeah.
they'll tell you, I've always done this on my project and my gut feel is this, but they don't tell you the bit that they're always wrong.
So how do you manage that, Pav? How do you manage that at Pascal's? Because you're aware of some of the hallucinations. You're aware of some of the times that the AI will typically try to give you a response, even though there is no response to give, because that's what it's been trained to do. How do you manage that when you have a user at Pascal's who is not aware of these emergent properties?
with the diffusion models, whether that's creating visuals or videos, animations, I think for us is we see it as part of the concept stage, brainstorming, being able to visualize your ideas quickly, having workshops, discussions. That's quite useful for the design team. They want to be able to quickly prompt something and say, this is what I mean. I think around design, because I don't get involved with that aspect of it that much, I think for me, it's more focused on the project management side and the delivery side. But in terms of just diffusion in general, the benefits that the design guys have come back with is, being able to generate lots and lots of ideas. But then I have a problem with that, me personally. To me, I think one of the issues, and this is something I've discussed with my design director as well, is while this is fun and this is great, if you look at other industries, right, you look like aerospace, Rolls-Royce, I think they're using AI, to look at the design of the engine at a molecular level. Energy efficiency, maintenance, making it more monolithic so there's less components and stuff like that. That's a scientific challenge that they're trying to improve the industry, improve their product. I don't know, something random like zoologists. I read an article in National Geographic how they're using AIs to map behavior, environmental data to kind of decipher how animals communicate, the relationships they form. This is all scientific backing with challenges. For me, when I think about architects, I get worried when they're purely focusing on producing these dreamy, amazing imagery, which a lot of them come up with flaws. You look at a lot of architectural imagery that's generated, and I may alienate some of your audience here if I say that a lot of it's unrealistic, and
Yeah, I think
we don't want to be distracted too much down this path. You're actually creating more problems, more challenges that the other disciplines like the engineers and stuff will challenge. But that's why I said, I think, and my design director got this as well. He said we should only really be focusing on this in the concept stage, to brainstorm internally to understand what that means. What you don't want, to constantly communicate what your value is, as the architects, you shouldn't be relying on, AI models to make decisions for you.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So when I was at a previous practice, I won't mention any names because I don't want to get in trouble. I remember we were designing a skyscraper, and we had quite a big budget, so I think we 3D printed like close to 50 miniature models of this tower, and we laid them out on the table. We lined them all up, and we had visuals and stuff like that. And when the client and the stakeholders came around, we were walking them through, and we showed them this table, which looked impressive, but you had so many variations, and we were saying, we could go down this route, we could go down this route.
It was overkill, was it?
Sorry?
It was overkill, was it?
Well, it's not even that it was overkill. You're effectively communicating to the clients, we don't know which one to go with. You should be saying, look, based on your budget, based on the site constraints, the way your company culture is, your work, the challenges that you have in this environment, you should be saying, look, we've got 1 to 2 to 3 options here. This is the way to go, and it's all backed up by science, or there's a technical drive behind it. There are, and I think that's probably one of the reasons as well that I kind of nestled into workplace design, because I found it easier to communicate to the client that there's a business response to this design decision. So I remember we were working on an investment bank project. So they were doing an office refurb. They had a decent budget. There's a massive light well, a beautiful light well in the middle of the office space across multiple floors, and we had pushed for a feature stair that connected all the floors into the middle. And I remember the client saying, well, why are we going to do that? We've got the stair cores around the perimeter. We've got 3 of those. Why do we need this one in the middle? We were able to simulate, this was before AI, we were able to simulate movement and user flow. We do that a lot in aviation as well. When we're designing large terminals, we think about passenger experience. The different users of an airport terminal and how they move through the space. We were able to do that in an office as well, and we were able to demonstrate, well, actually what you're doing is you're encouraging people to use that main that main feature stair, and you're increasing sight lines. You're bumping into people you wouldn't normally bump into from different departments by using that as your main circulation. When you increase sight lines to people in the workplace, you increase communication. If you increase communication, you improve business performance. So these are the things that AI can actually plug into. These are the things that we should be using AI for in architecture to define our design decisions.
Yeah.
And I think architects can get distracted. They can do the fun stuff, but ultimately we should be learning from other industries that do how they use AI to justify their design decisions.
It's really interesting because, like you say, people get kind of very distracted by the whiz-bang stuff, and the fact that you can generate pictures or you can generate music or whatever it may be. But actually the real benefit, and we've talked about this quite a few times, haven't we, Yoshi, is using that AI as your thought partner, what Jeff Woods said. And from an architectural point of view, it's using it to supercharge your powers to be able to communicate those kind of concepts you were talking about to clients. And that's where I think the real power that a lot of people, I think, are missing with AI at the moment is. And you said something really important at the beginning, Pavan, which was too many people are using it like Google, which is true. So they use it and they use the whiz bang. They generate some pretty cool images, which is impressive. But then when it comes to actually using it to really help your day-to-day work, they're using it like Google still. So how are you sort of training or developing people so that they're using it so it can help them in exactly the kind of tasks you just spoke about?
So I think thinking of it as so if we take an LLM for example, thinking of it as, like you mentioned, a partner, or your colleague. You know, you're working. You've got a back and forth with it to tackle a task, rather than a Q&A session. What I've found is, if you use it in that way, it's a lot more beneficial.
Yeah.
It responds a lot better. You're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the great things about why it's picked up the way it has, is because it's just based on human language. The conversation you'd have with a colleague, if you have that same conversation with someone where you can perform, the task can perform better if you have a conversation. You're working collectively together towards a task, rather than asking it a question with no context and no background, and it's just going to give you a generalized response. If you were to just tell a colleague, okay, can you do X, Y, and Z? What is this? What is that? Well, they're going to come back with lots of questions that they need in order to do that task. It's exactly the same. You need to have that kind of conversation with them. So I think, yeah, when we've rolled it out, we have had some internal CPDs, and we've said, look, this is how we want to communicate. This is how you use it. Sorry. Have that conversation with them. Just experiment with it. See what works for you as well. Again, like I said, we're in phase 1. It's quite early days, so we're experimenting, and different people will have different ways of using it and different approaches, which will be more effective than what we initially thought it would be. And that's the great thing about this experimental phase, is that we're learning a lot from each other, and it's about knowledge sharing.
Yeah,
And
we
it's
all
been
are.
really insightful because, I mean, coming from a place where I'm not an architect and I haven't been in construction for very long, I mean, people tell me how would an architect use AI in the design phase? I'll tell you, it can give you many different variations of a design. And it would have to be really early on because you can't really connect data points into that generated piece of an asset, right? It's an image. It gives you inspiration. Within that, though, you've just spoken about something a lot more in depth, right? Understanding human connection, ergonomics, human factors, all these different elements. And you said that an AI can plug into that quite well. And I've found that really interesting because what we're now doing is we're using an AI to help us to understand human connection. When you would naturally think that a human would better understand what it would be like to use a space, actually, well, an AI from a problem solving point can do that quite effectively.
Yes and no. I hear what you're saying. I think so. This is one of the issues that I've always experienced. Is in this industry, which is any industry, is people. People are incredibly complex. They're irrational. I used to think that, you look at the Reba stages, that a project is quite a linear process, that you've got all these parties involved and they're all working towards the same goal. But that actually is far from the truth. Projects change completely, right? Through the life cycle of the project, different stakeholders have different agendas, goals. They all need to do their job really well. You may have a cost consultant who needs to ensure that the cost is, within that the project's within budget. You've got contractors, you've got project managers, you've got the architects who are trying to push the boundaries, be innovative. So everyone's kind of pushing the boundaries and trying to come to a neutral ground, right? And then you may have a project that certain stakeholders leave the project, especially these longer, more large, complex projects. They can go on for years, and in that time, agendas can change. So when you've got new stakeholders who come in, they may have a whole different strategy of how they're going to tackle it. So I think AI is really going to struggle with the irrational behaviors of humans and the unpredictability of us. And I think that's why I don't think AI will ever actually properly replace us. I can imagine that the roles will change. I think I can imagine AI agents being implemented into the workflow, and project managers now not only managing people and risk and stuff like that, but they're also managing different agents.
Yeah.
Agents that are integrated into the project. And then you'll have varying degrees of skills level for that. You'll have people who are so comfortable managing AI agents and being really efficient. And then you'll have people who are, I'll just focus on the end stakeholder, on the clientele,
Is that
all the consultants.
is that a world that you welcome? Because you're in the project management space as well from an architectural perspective. Is that a world
Yeah.
that you'd welcome?
The integration of AI agents.
Yeah. So as a PM, you're managing not just the schedule, the costs, the people, but you're managing a new dimension, which is going to be AI. And I guess to some extent, you have to then manage the interaction of the AI with other stakeholders and the people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think just engaging with any kind of new technology. See if I can plug it into my workflow and experiment with it and play with it, and constantly pushed efficiency from my side, I would definitely welcome that. I think the risk of just turning it back to say, no, I'm going to do this traditional way. Well, everyone else is going to evolve. Everyone else is going to start to integrate AI into their work streams. You'll either be delivering less efficiently, or you'll just completely cut yourself out in terms of competition. And so I think it's important to engage with it because it's going to happen anyway. That's my view on it anyway.
With a lot of these LLMs and generative AI itself, they're trained on finite data points made by humans, right? And there's going to be a certain point where a lot of these models are outputting the same thing purely because of similar prompting, a lot more generic inputs, and then the outputs themselves become quite similar. So that might lead to a homogenization of outputs. Now, what do you think that looks like with an architecture? And is there a danger of things looking the same?
Well, so I think it's a good question. And I think that just highlights the importance of what individual practices are doing and the experiences of what they're doing. So, for example, Pascal's, biggest sector is aviation, right? They've been doing it since the 90s. So they have a whole lot of data in terms of aviation, how you design an airport, the flow of people through terminals against the, world-renowned workplace office design. So different practices have their niches and they have their expertise and they have their experiences on projects, the various projects they've been working on. No two projects, regardless of the brief, the budget, the client, they would never be exactly the same because of the experiences and everything that's happening. So if you're able to capture that data, per practice, you're gonna get different outcomes. And then I think that's where it puts pressure. And I think what's a good thing is each practice has competition, right? It's competitive data collecting and that intellectual property that you're collating and that you're holding internally to build up your data sets or your language model. All of that makes you stand out to your competitors. I think with all of that information, those experiences, those risks, how you overcame those risks, all of that data that's being fed in, it's going to be experienced different and it's going to be different ways of addressing it. So I think what will happen is, we talked about, I think we talked about it briefly offline, which is about LLMs being, more important than a website. A website is your identification, right? You go to a website, you say, okay, this company does this, blah, 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 blah. But the quality of your service, the quality of what you will do will be all based on your data that you're putting into your LLM. So why I think, and I think that's why it's also really important that you're teaching your staff or you're training your staff in the quality of data and how to capture that and how to input that. Of course, if you're going to have architects or project managers saying generic stuff and using, doing very simple stuff and not fully optimizing what these tools can do for you, they're going to use it generically. So the quality of the data that they're putting into it isn't going to be great. So it can happen, definitely. But I think I'm not too worried, me personally, there being a generic output across an industry of what's going to, and if there is, it may be that, well, that's the best solution because multiple practices are coming out with the same solution.
Well, there's certain industry, I suppose there's certain sectors where the aesthetic appeal doesn't matter. Let's say data centers, for example, it's just a box or a shed.
Yeah.
But I still believe, we wrote about this on the newsletter recently, that I still believe when it comes to art, and you take an architecture as an art form, people don't buy the art, they buy the story, and that story is a human story about how you came up with certain design decisions. And I'm still hopeful that actually what AI will do will take away the grunt work for your sheds that you've got to design, and the boring kind of things that are just kind of things that you've got to produce, and then actually separate the real artistic stuff where you need a signature architect to come in and provide a story around it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're right. It's the application of AI in practice, and I think it's not just in construction; it's all industries, right? So if you take healthcare, for example, I went to a talk last week at the Barbican, and one of the panelists was talking about a study in which they use in healthcare, where they developed an AI model, language model or assistant to take calls from patients, right? Getting appointments, diagnosing them and stuff like that. And what they found was the AI was more empathetic to the people on the call compared to the individuals. And this is
interesting.
And I think this is not so much to do with. It could be worrying from one sense, but I think it's more to do with stress and workload. The enormous amount of pressure that's on the existing workforce. So if you can have something like that in place, that effectively, like you said, James, it takes pressure off you to deal with the masses or the repetitive or the mundane, and to really connect with people. And I think that's what this industry is about, right? It's when I think about way I approach project management or architecture or stuff I'm working on, it's about dealing with people more than anything. And that's also one reason I think that AI probably isn't a threat to say that it's going to come in. Because if you look at a project, previously I used to believe, okay, it's a very linear process. The Reba stages are perfectly organized. It's a breakdown. It tells you exactly what it is. But what it doesn't put in there is how annoying people are and how unpredictable they are in a project, especially, large infrastructural
We're
projects.
strange creatures, aren't we? That's the thing.
Yeah, and I think AI relies on logic and systematic approaches and to make those more efficient. The moment you put human nature into that, whether it's driven by, individual engenders, different roles, different personalities, egos, it gets really, really difficult to navigate. And that's what project managers are there for, right? They're there to deliver, but to manage people, stakeholders, interests of certain businesses, and so forth. So I think ultimately the application of AI should be exactly like you said, James. It should be towards automation, things that we can get done, repetitive tasks, so we can focus on human connection and building rapport and those client relationships. And also then to step away and say, let's be innovative. Let's push boundaries, because the data that AI has, they're not going to be innovative. Not at the moment anyway, until we get to, what do you call it?
AGI.
AGI, yeah.
Which is what, next week?
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, so the moment we get to AGI or, ASI, I think they say ASI is superior
super intelligence.
Yeah, then we've got a whole different problem. We're not just talking about industry, we're just talking about our existence overall, the issue we have with that.
Exactly. I try and break things down to like the short and medium term on this podcast, because when we do talk about the long term, but you are guessing, there's so many directions it could go in.
Yeah.
And it depends how optimistic or pessimistic you're feeling on any particular day. Some days I'm feeling extremely hopeful about the future and what it means for humanity and for architects and people and for surveyors and for project managers. There's other days I do feel extremely frightened, and I know you feel the same, Yoshi. It's like a bit of a roller coaster of emotions at the moment when we're looking at AI.
It does. It feels like one week there's a big jump in AI and everyone's screaming AGI. And then the next week, there's news that these things can't actually do what they're promising to do. So the Apple event or the Apple paper recently about language reasoning models don't actually reason. And as problem complexity increases, they collapse. And there's some weird emergent properties, right? Like some of these models, when they can't solve a task, they collapse both in their accuracy or performance and the fact they don't actually use all their tokens up. So it's like they just give up. And we don't know if that giving up is because, it's the system actually having some level of learned frugality, right? It knows it can't solve it. So it's going to, it's going to be a lot more reserved in terms of what it's using.
What gives me some hope, though, is another study I saw recently was like when you actually get these kind of multiple agents working together in an agentic workflow and they actually start checking each other and that improves performance. It's quite interesting. There was a study which showed that it was three. If you get three relatively unpowerful models, say GPT 3.5, I know that doesn't exist anymore, but this study had 3.5 and the base model of Claude and the base model of Llama. The three of them together, checking each other, perform better than the most powerful. I think it was Claude's Sonnet 4.5, which is really interesting because that's the combination and accumulation of models working together in an agentic kind of system.
Yeah, and this is where one training technique is having smaller models moderate bigger models as they grow.
Exactly.
So it's an interesting point. And also, like kind of corroborating your point, James, in a lot of these papers, they talk about, so O3 kind of dropped in performance. I think it was DeepSeek. All of them dropped in performance, right? But they didn't take into account that scaffolding. So like you said, we're in the age of agents. We're not just relying on pure intelligence of a single model. We're relying on a connected scaffolding of different agents and with different roles and those who have code interpreters or other sorts of tool use, right? Because we know
to their strengths.
Using them to their strengths. So we're in that phase now. And I guess from a perspective or in architecture or project delivery, this scaffolding is going to be key. Even managing hallucinations, bringing out originality.
But isn't that going to be a really key role of the architect or the project manager, Pavan, in that you need to understand what model to use for what use case, even within architecture? Because if you're doing an area schedule or a door schedule, that's going to be, there'll probably be a model that's more suited to that than if you're trying to do some blue sky thinking and some creativity. They're going to be two very different use cases. So part of the role of any professional really is you need to understand these models and understand which one to use for which particular use case.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I think we're quite early in our adoption in terms of how we've integrated into the business. So right now we have a generative model with, in our phase one, we've only put it towards certain individuals. And then we have a language model who the project managers are using that mostly just to get their feedback. But what we're seeing is that people are starting to customize them according to the specific task that they're doing on the day or that they do daily. And I think that's what's important, is that you give that creative freedom, because people are establishing their own workflows at the moment, rather than having something that's generic that's put in there and say, use it like this. Because I think this is the thing that excites me the most about it, is that level of customization to it. So whether it is, we've got some visualizers who are using it in a very specific way, and then we've got marketing who are using
a different way,
in a completely different way, and then they feed that information to each other as well. And they say, look, I experimented with this, I got this output. The visualizers are doing this. So I think that's important to just add, especially where we are at this stage, is to allow it to be completely open. And to
give people that creative freedom so they can experiment. That's how you get the best outcomes.
Yeah, exactly.
Pavan, I can't believe it's been sort of nearly 45 minutes since we've been talking. So we're going to have to bring the podcast to a close, unfortunately. But before we do, we always like to ask sort of a more personal question about you.
Okay.
So my question to you is, if you could put one belief of yours, and that can be in terms of architecture or in terms of AI or in terms of anything else. So one belief or value on a billboard seen by millions, what would it say?
Oh, these questions, this makes me find it really difficult to narrow down onto one point. One belief.
You can have more than one if you want.
Yeah, no. I would say
it's a big billboard.
Yeah, it's a really big billboard.
It's got an essay on it.
Okay, so my worry is why I get fascinated with AI, for example. Why technology, my dad was a techie. He had an IT company. He was really fascinated. So I grew up around tech. So I got, and so for me to go down this avenue and to adopt it as much as I have and push it in the business, it's not unusual the way I see it. But I do at the same time really worry about our reliance on technology. Right. And, I've seen a generation of, I came from a generation of online gaming, going through that. And now I have kids, I have a son, and I see how embedded technology is. See how long this billboard is. This is a massive billboard.
We're going to narrow it down to a few words in a minute.
I would say while technology is there to assist us and aid us, we should be able to escape from it. as well.
Turn off your device. Is that
Turn
it?
off your device. I know it's a bit cliche, and I think just because I see my son, and I think just get out, get out, run around, move, exercise. I think it's so important.
What's that
It may
saying?
be a
What's that
cliche.
saying? There's a certain saying, was it? Touch grass.
Yeah.
As simple as that. Just one word. There's 2 words.
There you go. We've summed it up. But it may be a cliche, but it bears repeating because we really are getting more and more reliant on screens to the point that it is worrying. And you know, there's some days where I find myself, and I think, geez, I've been on a screen the entire day since the moment I woken up to the moment I gone to bed.
Yeah.
That's not healthy. That's not good. So I think that's a good. See, we got down in the end to a really good billboard.
Yeah, with some editing. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I've just got a question for you, Pav, as well, just before we close up. Slightly different track to James, but you know, based back on you. So, in your life, if you had a theme song right now
Jesus.
that would
Okay.
describe you, what would it be and why?
Well, okay, yeah, I've got kids. So I've got some babies at home, and so we're just trying to survive right now. So it'd probably be that Survive song. I'm a survivor, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Survivor songs out there, actually. You could make a playlist of Survivor songs.
Exactly. Yeah. Or Staying Alive. Yeah, Staying Alive by Bee Gees. I think that's another one. So,
Yeah, that's a good one.
just trying to stay alive. Yeah.
That might be more apt than we think in 10 years' time when the AGI comes.
Yeah,
true. And we are genuinely trying to stay alive. But where can people find more about either yourself or Pascal's?
Yeah, I mean, you can look me up on LinkedIn if you want to reach out there, or pascalwatson.com. You can go to our website and reach out to us.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll put those links in the show notes so people can just click along if they want to find out more. And all that remains to be said is just thank you very much for your time. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys.
Excellent. Take care.